Before we begin, I want you to know something. This story has a hopeful ending. The labor is long and uncertain, but the baby arrives safely. These are real pregnancy stories shared with permission, told by a gynecologist who lived them. They are for support and education, not medical advice. If you are experiencing labor that starts and stops, or if you are waiting and wondering when it is real, please know that your patience is not weakness. It is strength. You are not alone. Let's begin. You know, after 30 years of delivering babies, I thought I had seen every possible version of labor. Fast labors, long labors, silent labors, screaming labors. But there is one type of suffering that medical textbooks barely mention. It is the torture of a labor that starts with fury, builds hope and terror in equal measure, and then simply vanishes, leaving the mother stranded in a body she no longer trusts. I met Rachel on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. She was 31 weeks pregnant with her first child, a baby girl they had already named Lucia. But when she walked into my examination room, she did not look like an expectant mother glowing with anticipation. She looked like a woman who had been running a marathon she never signed up for. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back without care. And her hands, I noticed her hands first. They were shaking slightly as she placed them on her belly. She sat down across from me and said, "Doctor, I have been to 2 different hospitals in the last 7 days, and I am so tired of being sent home." I asked her to tell me everything, and she did. The first time had been 8 days earlier. She was cooking dinner when a deep pressure started in her lower back. She described it as someone grabbing her spine from the inside and twisting slowly. She started timing the contractions on her phone, for minutes apart, then 3. She called her husband, told him to leave work immediately, and drove herself to the nearest emergency room. By the time she reached triage, she was crying from the pain. They put her on the monitor. They checked her cervix, 1 centimeter. And then, as if someone had turned off a switch, the contractions stopped completely. The nurse told her it was likely Braxton Hicks. The resident said some women just have irritable wombs. They sent her home with a pamphlet about false labor. Rachel told me she sat in her car in the hospital parking garage for 20 minutes before she could drive. Not because she was in pain anymore, because she was so deeply, impossibly confused. Her body had screamed emergency, and then it had gone silent. She felt like a liar even though she had done nothing wrong. That was the first time her body lied to her. It would not be the last. Looking back, Rachel told me that the first false alarm should have been a warning. Not a warning about her baby's health, but a warning about what was coming for her mind. Because the first time your body screams and then goes silent, you tell yourself it was a fluke, a one-time thing, a dress rehearsal that went too far. But the second time? The second time changes something inside you. 3 days after that first hospital visit, Rachel was folding laundry in the nursery. The room was almost ready. Pink blankets, a white crib, little dresses hanging in the closet. She had been feeling fine all day, almost relaxed, almost letting herself believe the first time was nothing. And then it hit her again. Not in her back this time. Low in her belly, like a fist clenching and unclenching. She sat down on the floor immediately, her back against the crib, and pulled out her phone. The first contraction lasted 50 seconds. The second came 7 minutes later. Then 5 minutes. Then 4. But here is what broke my heart when she told me this part. She did not call her husband. She did not call the hospital. She sat on that nursery floor for 45 minutes, timing contractions alone, because she was already ashamed. She kept whispering to herself, "It's probably nothing again. They'll just send me home again. I don't want to be that woman." She told me she almost did not go. She almost convinced herself to stay home and wait it out. But the 4th contraction was so strong that she vomited into the laundry basket. That was when she finally called her mother to drive her to the hospital. And what happened next? The exact same pattern. By the time they checked her in, her cervix was still closed. The contractions were coming every 3 minutes on the monitor, clear as day, undeniable on paper. But within an hour they softened. slowed, stopped. A different doctor came in this time, a young man who barely looked at her. He said, "Your body is just practicing. Go home. Get some rest. You'll know when it's real." Rachel looked at him and asked a question I have heard so many times since. What if I don't know? What if it keeps doing this and I miss the real one? The doctor shrugged. He had no answer for her. And that was the moment Rachel realized she was completely alone inside her own uncertain body. Let me tell you something that most people don't understand about false labor. The physical pain is real. The contractions register on monitors. The back pain, the cramping, the pressure, none of that is imaginary. But the shame? The shame is heavier than any contraction. Because every time a pregnant woman walks back into that hospital after being sent home, she feels the weight of eyes on her. She hears the unspoken question. Are you sure this time? Rachel lasted 4 days before her body betrayed her again. She had been trying so hard to trust the signs. She drank more water. She rested on her left side. She stopped timing every twitch and flutter. And for 72 hours, nothing happened. She almost convinced herself it was over. She almost let herself breathe. Then, on a Sunday evening, her husband was grilling chicken on the balcony, and she was sitting on the couch watching the news. A contraction ripped through her lower abdomen so suddenly that she dropped her glass of water. It shattered on the floor. She did not even notice. Her husband ran inside to find her bent over the arm of the couch, unable to speak. This time, the contractions did not mess around. They came fast and hard, for minutes apart. Then 3, then 2. She was dilating. She could feel the pressure low in her pelvis. Her husband grabbed the hospital bag they had packed after the first false alarm. They drove with the hazards on, running red lights when the streets were empty. But here is the part that broke Rachel's spirit. When they walked into the labor and delivery unit, the nurse at the front desk looked at her chart and said, "Oh, you're back." Not meanly, not cruelly, just a simple observation. But Rachel told me those 3 words felt like a knife. She was no longer a concerned mother. She was a regular, a repeater, the woman who cried wolf. They put her on the monitor. The contractions were strong, real, visible. The nurse even said, "Oh, these look promising." And then 2 hours later, silence. Again. Her cervix had not budged. The on-call doctor suggested she might be experiencing prodromal labor, a condition where the uterus contracts intensely, but does not progress into active labor. The doctor said some women experience this for weeks. Rachel cried in the hospital bathroom before they discharged her. Not from pain. From the humiliation of walking past that front desk again. From the fear of coming back tomorrow. From the exhaustion of a body that refused to make up its mind. She looked at her husband in the parking lot and said, "I can't do this again. I can't keep being wrong." But her body did not care what she could or could not do. If stories like this touch your heart, and you want to hear how Rachel finally found her way through this nightmare, please consider supporting this channel so more women know they are not alone in this silent struggle. Let me paint you a picture of what Rachel's life became during those 2 weeks. Because the medical term prodromal labor sounds clinical and harmless. It sounds like a footnote in a textbook. But living inside it? It is a prison made of uncertainty. And the walls of that prison are built from the small, daily humiliations that no one talks about. Rachel stopped leaving her house entirely. Not because she was on bed rest. Because she was afraid of being caught off guard. What if she went to the grocery store and a contraction hit so hard she collapsed in the cereal aisle? What if she went for a walk and her water broke 2 miles from home? What if she sat down at a restaurant and had to be carried out while strangers stared? So she stayed home, day after day, the same 4 walls, the same anxious thoughts circling like vultures. She stopped buying anything that could not be returned. No more baby clothes. No more nursery decorations. She told me she had a box of unopened diapers sitting in the corner of the living room, and every time she looked at it, she felt like she was jinxing herself. Like preparing for her daughter's arrival might somehow make her daughter come too early, or not at all. She stopped unpacking the hospital bag after each false alarm. She just left it zipped by the door, half empty, waiting. Her husband tried to help. He really did. He came home early from work every day. He rubbed her back during the contractions that came and went like tides. But Rachel could see the exhaustion in his eyes too. The way he hesitated every time she said, "I think this is it." The way he would look at his phone, calculating how many times he had left his desk this month. He never said it out loud, but Rachel knew he was starting to doubt her too. The hardest part was her mother-in-law. She called every evening to check in, and Rachel could hear the shift in her tone. The first week, it was pure concern. "Oh honey, you poor thing." By the second week, it had curdled into something sharper. "Well, maybe you're just sensitive to normal pregnancy pains." My labors were always very straightforward. Rachel started lying to her. She would say, "Everything is fine. No contractions today." Even when she had spent the morning on the bathroom floor, gripping the towel rack, timing waves of pain that went nowhere. She lied because she could not bear to hear one more person imply that she was being dramatic, that she was imagining things, that her body was not actually screaming at her every single day. She told me something in my office that still haunts me. She said, "Doctor, I used to trust my body. I used to think if something was wrong, I would know. But now, my body cries wolf every single day, and I don't know if I'll recognize the truth when it finally comes." That was when I realized Rachel was not just waiting for labor to start. She was waiting to trust herself again. After the fourth false alarm, Rachel sat in my examination room and did something I will never forget. She did not cry. She did not yell. She simply looked at me with empty eyes and said, "Doctor, I am not leaving this building until you do an ultrasound. I don't care if I have to sleep in the waiting room. I need to see her. I need to know if something is wrong." I have learned over 30 years that when a mother reaches this point, you listen. Not because every demand is medically necessary, but because her intuition is screaming louder than any machine ever could. So I agreed. I cleared my schedule and walked her to the ultrasound room myself. The technician began the scan in silence, as they often do. Rachel lay on the table, holding her own belly, staring at the black and white image on the screen. Her baby girl was moving. Good heart rate. Good fluid levels. Everything looked normal. The technician measured the head, the abdomen, the femur. All standard. All healthy. But then the technician paused. She tilted the wand. She zoomed in on something near the placenta, and her face changed. It was subtle, a slight furrow between her brows, a tiny hesitation before she typed her measurements. But I saw it. And Rachel saw it too. "What is it?" Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. The technician looked at me. I walked over to the screen and studied the image. The placenta looked normal at first glance. The cord insertion point appeared to be in the right place. But something was off. The cord was angling slightly before it entered the placenta. Not a dramatic deviation. Just a few millimeters. I asked the technician to measure the distance from the cord insertion to the placental edge. She did. And then she did it again. The number was borderline. Not dangerously abnormal, but close. Very close. Rachel had a marginal cord insertion. It meant the umbilical cord was attached too close to the edge of the placenta instead of safely in the center. In most pregnancies, this causes no problems at all. But in some cases, it can lead to poor fetal growth, bleeding, or sudden changes in blood flow to the baby. And here was the connection I had been missing. An irritable uterus, one that contracts over and over without progressing, can sometimes be triggered by subtle placental stress. The baby was not in immediate danger. But her body had been responding to something real all along. Rachel sat up on the ultrasound table, tears streaming down her face. But these were not sad tears. She looked at me and said, "So I wasn't crazy. My body wasn't lying." I shook my head. "No, Rachel. Your body was warning you. We just weren't listening carefully enough." For the first time in 2 weeks, she smiled. It was small and exhausted and fragile, but it was real. Finding the answer should have brought Rachel peace. Instead, it brought her a different kind of nightmare. because knowing about the marginal cord insertion did not stop the contractions. It did not tell her when labor would finally become real. It only added a layer of fear to every single twinge and wave. Was this contraction just her irritable uterus? Or was this the moment her placenta started to struggle? I sat with Rachel in my office after the ultrasound, and I laid out the options. Neither of them felt like a good choice. The first option was hospital bed rest. She would be admitted until delivery, monitored around the clock. The nurses would track every contraction. The doctors would be seconds away if something changed. But hospital bed rest meant isolation. It meant her husband could only visit during certain hours. It meant sleeping in a room that smelled like antiseptic, eating hospital food, watching daytime television while the world moved on without her. The second option was daily monitoring visits. She would come to my clinic every morning for a non-stress test and an ultrasound. We would check the baby's heart rate, her movements, the blood flow through that marginal cord. If everything looked good, she would go home and wait. If something looked concerning, we would admit her immediately. She would sleep in her own bed. She would eat her own food. But she would live in 2-hour increments, never knowing if today's test would be the one that changed everything. Rachel stared at the wall behind my desk for a long time. Then she asked me the question that broke something in both of us. What if I stay home, and she comes at 2 in the morning? What if I fall asleep and the cord stops working and I don't know until it's too late? I told her the truth. I said, that is a real risk. A small one, but real. Then she asked me the quieter question, the one she was almost afraid to say out loud. What if I go to the hospital again and they send me home again? What if I spend 3 weeks in that place, missing my husband, missing my bed, and then they send me home with nothing? What if I miss the real thing because I am so tired of being wrong? I had no easy answer for her. No guarantee. No statistical reassurance that would quiet the fear in her voice. I told her that both choices were valid. Both came with costs, and neither would take away the uncertainty. Rachel put her hands on her belly and closed her eyes. Her baby girl was kicking softly, rhythmically, like a tiny heartbeat she could feel from the outside. She stayed that way for almost a full minute. When she opened her eyes, she looked older than her 31 years. Daily monitoring, she said. I want to sleep in my own bed. I want to feel normal for as long as I can. But doctor? She reached across the desk and touched my hand. You have to promise me something. If I come to you one day and tell you something feels different, you will believe me. Even if the monitors look fine. Even if the tests say nothing is wrong. You will believe me. I promised her. And I meant it. The days that followed settled into a strange, fragile rhythm. Every morning at 8 o'clock, Rachel walked into my clinic. She wore the same gray sweatpants and the same oversized sweater. She never bothered with makeup anymore. She would lie down on the exam table, and we would listen to her baby girl's heart. Strong, steady, 140 beats per minute. The cord blood flow looked adequate. The fluid levels were normal. Every day, the same results. Every day, I sent her home with the same words. Everything looks good. Go rest. But Rachel was not resting. She told me later that she had stopped sleeping more than 2 hours at a time. Every time she closed her eyes, she was afraid she would miss something. What if the contractions started in her sleep? What if her baby stopped moving while she was dreaming? She kept her phone on her chest, vibrating mode, a timer set to go off every hour, so she could wake up and poke her belly until Lucia kicked back. Her husband started sleeping on the couch. Not because they were fighting, because Rachel could not stop tossing and turning, and he had to work, and someone in that apartment needed to be functional. The distance between them grew in inches, then feet, then miles. They still loved each other. But the waiting was eroding something soft and necessary between them. Then came the night. Thursday night. 34 weeks and 3 days. Rachel woke up at exactly 1:47 a.m. She always remembered the time because she looked at her phone, thinking it was time for her hourly kick check. But the kick check was not what woke her. It was the pain. Low and deep. Different. Not in her back this time. Not the cramping she had learned to recognize and dismiss. This was something else. Something pulling from inside, like a hand reaching down and gripping her from the core. She sat up slowly in bed. The apartment was dark. Her husband was snoring on the couch. She could hear the soft rumble through the thin walls. She did not call out to him. Not yet. She pulled out her phone and started the timer. First contraction, 1:48 a.m. Lasted 62 seconds. She waited. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. Second contraction, 1:53 a.m. 5 minutes apart. She got out of bed and walked to the bathroom. Sat on the edge of the tub. Breathed the way I had taught her. Slow inhale. Longer exhale. Third contraction, 1:59 a.m. Fourth, 2:04 a.m. Fifth, 2:09 a.m. Rachel sat in the dark bathroom for 45 minutes, timing contraction after contraction, and she did not wake her husband. She was terrified, but not of the pain. She was terrified of being wrong again. What if this was just another false alarm? What if she shook him awake, drove to the hospital, and walked past that front desk one more time? What if the contractions stopped again and she had to look that nurse in the eye and say, "Never mind"? She put her hands on her belly and whispered into the silence. "Please don't be lying to me again, baby girl. Please. I can't do another parking lot cry. I need you to be real this time." And then the sixth contraction came. Stronger. Longer. Shri edit at 75 seconds. 4 minutes apart now. Something in her chest shifted. Not hope exactly. Something quieter. A certainty that had been buried under weeks of shame and exhaustion. She stood up, walked to the living room, and touched her husband's shoulder. "John," she said. Her voice was calm. "This is not another false alarm. I need you to drive me to the hospital. And I need you to drive fast." He looked at her face in the dim light. He did not ask if she was sure. He just grabbed the keys. Rachel walked into the labor and delivery unit at 2:57 a.m. The same automatic doors. The same fluorescent lights. The same nurse at the same desk. But this time, Rachel did not look away. She walked straight to the check-in window, placed both hands on the counter, and said, "I'm Rachel. I've been here 4 times before. But this time is different. Please just check me. Please." The nurse looked at her chart, then at her face, and something in Rachel's expression must have translated what words could not. The nurse nodded and led her to a triage room without another word. They put her on the monitor. The contractions were coming every 3 minutes now, visible on the paper strip as sharp peaks, undeniable. The nurse called for a cervical check. Rachel held her breath. She had been stuck at 1 centimeter for 2 weeks. Her body had refused to progress, no matter how strong the contractions felt. The resident performed the exam. Her face was neutral, professional, unreadable. Rachel watched her like a prisoner watching a jury deliberate. "You're 3 centimeters, the resident said. "Maybe 4. Rachel's husband grabbed her hand. She did not cry. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, a release of something that had been wound too tight for too long. But then the waiting began again. Because prodromal labor does not give up its victim easily, they moved Rachel to a delivery room. A real one this time, with a bed that folded into pieces and a bassinet warmer in the corner. She looked at that empty bassinet and let herself imagine her daughter lying there. Just for a second. Just long enough to feel hope. Then the contractions changed. They became irregular. For minutes apart, then 7, then 3, then 9. The monitor strip that had looked so promising started to show gaps. Long stretches of flat line where her uterus went silent. Rachel watched the paper printing out, watched the evidence of her body's betrayal spooling onto the floor, and she felt the old familiar shame crawling back up her throat. 3 centimeters. No progression for 2 hours. The resident came in and mentioned the word stalled. Rachel closed her eyes. But this time, I was there. I had driven to the hospital at 3:30 a.m. when the night nurse called me. I walked into Rachel's room at 4:15 a.m., still in my jeans from the day before, no coat, hair pulled back. She looked at me and whispered, It's stopping again, isn't it? I looked at the monitor. I looked at her face. And then I asked the resident to do one more cervical check and an ultrasound to check the baby's position. The resident looked confused but did it anyway. And that was when we found the twist no one expected. Lucia had turned. Sometime in the last 48 hours, the baby had rotated from head down to face up, what we call occiput posterior position. A face-up baby cannot put the same pressure on the cervix as a face-down baby. The contractions were real. The labor was real. But the mechanics were wrong. Rachel's body was not lying. Her baby girl was just positioned poorly, making the labor pattern look like another stop-and-start nightmare. I looked at Rachel and said, "You were right. This is real. We just need to help your daughter turn." For the first time in weeks, Rachel nodded without a trace of doubt in her eyes. The next few hours became a quiet war between Rachel's exhaustion and her will. I explained that we had two paths forward. We could wait and see if Lucia turned on her own. Some babies do, especially when contractions are strong. Or I could attempt to manually reposition her. A series of guided movements and position changes that might encourage the baby to rotate. Neither option came with a guarantee. Both required something Rachel had very little of left: patience. She looked at me and said something I have carried with me ever since. "Doctor, I have spent 2 weeks waiting for my body to tell me the truth. Now it finally has. I'm not waiting anymore." We started with positioning. I asked Rachel to get on her hands and knees on the hospital bed, a technique called open knee chest position. It uses gravity and space to encourage a face-up baby to turn. Her husband knelt beside her, holding her face in his hands, whispering things I could not hear. The contractions kept coming, irregular still but strong. Rachel breathed through each one like a woman who had finally stopped fighting her own body and started working with it. After an hour, we checked again. Lucia had rotated slightly but was still face up. Rachel's cervix had crept to 5 centimeters. Progress, but slow. Too slow. I sat on the edge of her bed and told her the truth. "We can break your water manually. It will make the contractions harder and closer together. It might also give Lucia the room she needs to turn the rest of the way. But once I do this, there is no going back. If labor stalls again after this, we will have to talk about a C-section." Rachel did not hesitate. She reached for my hand and squeezed it so hard I felt my rings pressing into my skin. "Do it," she said. "I need to meet my daughter. I can't live in this waiting room anymore." I prepared the amnihook. Her husband held her from behind, his arms wrapped around her shoulders. I explained every step as I did it, the way I always do. A quick movement, a rush of warm fluid, and then almost immediately everything changed. The contractions that had been teasing and stuttering for 2 weeks turned into something else entirely. A wave that started at the top of her uterus and crashed downward with a force that made Rachel cry out. Not from fear this time. From the pure, overwhelming reality of a body that had finally committed. I watched the monitor as the peaks became regular. 3 minutes apart. 2 minutes. The baby's heart rate stayed beautiful and strong. And then the nurse looked at me and said, "She's turning. I can see her belly shifting." Lucia had heard the door open, and she was coming through. If you believe in the power of a mother's persistence, and you want to hear how Rachel's story finally reached its ending, please consider showing your support for this channel, so we can keep sharing these quiet miracles. The final stage of Rachel's labor lasted 15 hours. 15 hours of a body that had been teasing for weeks finally deciding to do the work it had been avoiding. I have seen hundreds of deliveries, but I stayed in that room for almost all of hers. Not because she needed medical intervention, because she needed someone to bear witness to what happens when a woman refuses to give up on herself. By midday, Rachel was fully dilated. 10 centimeters. The same cervix that had stubbornly refused to budge through 4 false alarms was now gone, melted away by the relentless pressure of a baby girl who had finally found her way into the right position. Lucia had turned completely during the night, face down low ready. Rachel pushed for 2 hours. Her husband counted. The nurses cheered. I sat at the foot of the bed, watching the top of Lucia's head appear and retreat, like the tide testing the shore. Every time Rachel pushed, she made a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a prayer. Something in between. Something primeval. And then, at 4:37 p.m., Lucia's head emerged. One more push for the shoulders. A slippery rush. And she was out. She was small. 34 weeks and 5 days is early, and she weighed only 4 pounds and 11 ounces. Her skin was thin enough to see the blue threads of veins beneath. Her cry was not the lusty wail of a full-term baby. It was smaller. Thinner. A reedy little sound that somehow filled the entire room. The NICU team moved in immediately, the way they always do for a late preterm baby. They dried her, stimulated her, listened to her heart and lungs. Rachel lay on the bed, arms outstretched, reaching for a daughter she could not yet hold. Her husband was crying. I was crying too, though I tried to hide it behind my mask. 2 minutes passed. Then 5. The NICU lead turned to me and nodded. She's stable, breathing on her own. Stronger than she looks. They wrapped Lucia in a warm blanket and placed her on Rachel's chest. Skin to skin. The way it should be. Rachel looked down at this tiny, fighting creature and did not sob. She just stared. Her finger traced the curve of Lucia's cheek, the tiny wrinkle of her forehead, the impossible smallness of her hands. I waited so long for you. Lucia's little fingers curled around her mother's thumb. And in that moment, all the false alarms, all the parking lot tears, all the shame and exhaustion and sleepless nights collapsed into something that looked like peace. The waiting room had finally produced a birth. Rachel and Lucia stayed in the hospital for 4 days. Not because Lucia was sick, but because late preterm babies need to prove they can eat, breathe, and maintain their temperature before they go home. Those 4 days were not the dramatic, terrifying NICU stay that Rachel had feared. They were quiet, gentle. Lucia nursed slowly but steadily. She slept on her mother's chest while Rachel watched reality television and ate hospital jello and finally rested. I visited them on the last morning before discharge. Rachel was sitting in the rocking chair by the window, Lucia bundled against her like a tiny koala. The morning light made everything soft. Rachel looked up at me and smiled. A real smile, not the exhausted, fragile one I had seen in my office weeks earlier. "Doctor," she said, "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. I keep waiting for someone to tell me this isn't real, that she's not really mine to keep." I sat down on the edge of the bed and told her something I have learned from 30 years of delivering babies. "Rachel, your body spent 2 weeks preparing you for the worst. It taught you to expect disappointment. But that was survival talking. You don't have to keep living that way. Your daughter is here. She is healthy, and you did not fail her once. Not even on the days when you thought you were crying wolf." She looked down at Lucia's face, peaceful and serious even in sleep. "I almost gave up," she whispered. "After the 3rd false alarm, I almost stopped going to the hospital at all. What if I had?" I shook my head. "But you didn't. That's the only thing that matters. You kept showing up. Even when you were humiliated. Even when you were exhausted. Even when your own mind told you to stay home. You showed up." Here is what Rachel taught me, and what I want every expecting mother to understand. Stop and start labor is not a sign that your body is broken. It is not proof that you are dramatic or anxious or imagining things. It is a conversation, a messy, terrifying, nonlinear conversation between you and your unborn child. Some babies take their time. Some wombs need to practice before they perform. The shame you feel when you walk into that hospital for the 3rd time? It does not belong to you. It belongs to a system that has forgotten how to listen to mothers. Trust yourself. Keep showing up. Because the day your body finally commits, you will realize that all those false alarms were not lies. They were rehearsals. And you have been ready all along. Lucia is 3 years old now. She still does everything on her own schedule. And Rachel? She finally sleeps through the night.